Welcome back, and again we're joined by Mr. Hany Abou-El-Fotouh, an economic expert. Good evening to you, sir.
Good evening.
Can you tell us a bit about the IMF report in general? What are the projections for the Egyptian economy in the next fiscal year?
Well, from time to time, IMF and other international organizations issue forecast reports about the world economy and by country as well.
Yes.
In this first quarter of the year, the IMF issued a report called the Fiscal Monitor Report, and this report explained the projections of the Egyptian economy and the outlook. In fact, the IMF upgraded Egypt's budget projections, and indeed it said that the forecast for the Egyptian economy is well, and Egypt has passed or has survived the COVID-19 test better than previously thought.
Yes.
Because we are speaking about many indicators and indices, I will need to refer and discuss with the audience the figures showing the significance of these indicators. So the Fiscal Monitor Report explained that the outlook of the Egypt's fiscal position has improved significantly in the past 6 months, despite the debt is expected to be on the high side. This is, again, it's not a new comment. It has been in the arena of the public finance since many years, but Egypt has achieved progress before the pandemic, yet the figures still indicate that the public debt is still on the high side.
Yes.
Also, the budget deficit is narrowing to 7.3% of GDP by the end of the current fiscal year, compared to 7.9% in the fiscal year 2019 and 20. This is indeed a good achievement, because this indicator, or the budget deficit, has been a problem, and Egypt has done many reforms in order to bring this deficit to the acceptable level.
Yes.
Similarly, the deficit is forecasted to shrink to 4.2% of the GDP by the middle of the decade, as compared to 3.8% projections of IMF in 6 months ago, in October, when it reviewed the Egyptian economy. The primary surplus, Egypt is expected to achieve a primary surplus in the public finances. The primary surplus means that the revenue less expenses are in a positive, excluding the debt burden.
Yes.
So the primary surplus which Egypt is expected to achieve is in the range of 1% of GDP at the end of the current fiscal year. Although it in the past it was expected to achieve 0.4%.
May I ask a question before we continue on? Like the government itself has said that they're expecting a budget surplus as well in the next quarter. Is this something that will relieve public debt, for instance, or is it something that it's just temporary?
Again, let me explain the primary surplus. So any country has revenue coming primarily from tax revenues, and it also incurs the public expenditures. When the tax revenue is greater than the expenditure, excluding the interest on the public debt, this is a positive sign for the public finance. So that's Egypt is achieving probably for the second year.
Yes.
Last year it was expected to achieve 2% primary surplus, but due to the pandemic circumstances, it wasn't happening.
Yes. What about the GDP itself? Is there an expectation of stagnation, for instance, or is there going to be a growth? I know that Egypt hasn't seen contractions like other countries have in the world arena due to COVID.
Well, in another report called the World Economic Outlook, this report highlighted the gross forecast for for all countries, and for Egypt particularly. Egypt IMF lowered its forecast for the growth of the Egyptian economy from 2.8% to 2.5% in this fiscal year. However, IMF expected that the growth rate for the Egyptian economy will soar to 5.7% in the fiscal year 21-22, and this is a very good achievement. It brings us back to the state pre the pandemic.
Yes.
So in order to compare this achievement to or this growth rate to the world or the MENA region, this report indicated that the global economy will grow by 6% in this year, 2021, and will decline to 4.4% in year 2022.
Yes.
Another indicator is the comparison to the MENA region. The report highlighted also that the MENA region will grow by 4% in 2021 and will decline to 3.7% in 2022.
Yes.
So I believe that Egypt is achieving reasonable results as compared to the world economy, the growth in the MENA region and the world.
There have been projections, like the projections of the IMF in January was that Egypt would see a growth of 2.8%. And then it was revised again to almost a little over 5%. Why was there an increase in the projections? Why did we see this change?
From time to time, all these organizations amend or release amended forecasts. It depends on the variables in the world, around the world economy. So previously it expected that the Egyptian economy will grow by 2.8%. Now, because of the variables around the world, the impact of the COVID-19, the state of uncertainty in the world, it has amended its forecast to 2.5%. However, next year, this forecast has changed to be slightly higher, to achieve 5.7%.
Yes.
And previously it was forecasted to 5.5%. So there's an increase in the forecast for next year, while this year it amended the forecast to be slightly lower.
Can you tell us why Egypt was able to somewhat float the pandemic as opposed to developed nations like in Europe and Americas? What made us survive the COVID pandemic?
The hard measures that Egypt had taken in the economic reform programs has helped Egypt very much to stand the difficulties of the pandemic, and similarly the demand, the high demand, the force of the high demand in Egypt has pushed the growth to sustain Egypt, to sustain this growth rate. We are up, the population of Egypt is exceeding 100 million citizens. So this is a very huge force to create a demand.
Yes. We're just going to take a look at a report about the Egyptian economy, and then we're going to get back to talking about the economy and the projected forecasts. Let's take a look at this report. Welcome back, and we were still talking about the IMF report and about the Egyptian economy. We spoke a bit about the positives within how the Egyptian economy handled the pandemic, but there must be challenges as well. And we were just earlier talking during the report about unemployment rates and public debt. Can you tell us or elaborate more about this?
Well, of course, there are some challenges, and the Egyptian government needs to tackle these challenges very well. And for example, on the flip side, the deficit in the current account will reach around 4% this year before it narrows down to 2.5%
yes.
Next year, or maybe by the middle of the decade. Also, the unemployment rate will increase, is expected to rise to 9.8% in the current fiscal year, and next year it is expected to slightly decrease to 8.3%. And these challenges, of course, are being handled by the competent authorities in Egypt.
Yes.
Also, the inflation rate is a challenge, has always been a challenge. The inflation rate will decrease in the current fiscal year to 4.8% compared to 5.7% last year, but it will rise in the year fiscal year 21-22 to be 7.2%. This expectations of 7.2% is still within the threshold set by the Central Bank of Egypt, and it is an important factor in setting the key interest rates that the MCP issues or determines every month.
May I ask, as someone who's not an expert in the economy, I know that inflation in general is not something necessarily negative. There has to be a little bit of inflation in order for the economy to grow. But what is a healthy amount of inflation?
As rightfully said, inflation is not always bad. Sometimes when the government pursue expansionary policy, inflation is a must in order to increase the spending, increase the operations level in the economy. So inflation in itself is not a target, but inflation must be kept within the threshold limits set by the central bank in any country. And if it goes below this threshold, the monetary authority makes some changes to the interest rate, the key interest rate, in order to stimulate spending, in order to avoid going into recession. So inflation is not absolutely bad, but it must be contained and controlled.
What about unemployment? How will the government deal with it? Because you were saying the projections that they will increase and eventually slightly decrease. Are they going to handle this through, I mean, obviously they are handling it through creating different mega projects and creating jobs and all of that. But what other ways can they revive job creation? I know that obviously since the pandemic has started, for instance, the tourism industry has suffered quite deeply and there may be unemployment there. How does the government support them, for instance, or how do they create new jobs for people in the unemployment?
Well, by encouraging the private sector to expand and to spend more in order to keep the current workforce and not make them redundant. And that's why the monetary policy has a very close eye on keeping or maintaining the interest rate within the range and keeping an eye on inflation, because when the interest rate is 2% above the key interest rate, this stimulates or encourage business people to get money or to borrow from the banking sector. When they borrow money, they inject this money into projects, and this way they maintain the workforce instead of laying off the workers. So this is important. Also, as you rightfully said, the mega project is an important cushion to attract, to create jobs and attract or create many opportunities for workers to be employed in these projects.
May I ask, I mean, I know that loans, once the interest rate on loans decrease, investors are more likely to take loans out. But is also the decrease in interest rates when it comes to banking certificates, if I'm going to invest in banking certificates, when I decrease these loans, the interest rates there, does this also encourage people to invest more money in business rather than in banks?
Theoretically speaking, yes, but in practice, no.
Yes.
Because many people don't have they have what is called a zero risk tolerance. They are not familiar with business endeavors. They cannot take any risk because many of them they rely
on the interest rates.
On the yield, the interest rate coming from bank deposits and savings schemes. So maybe Egypt is a bit. This situation is a bit peculiar to Egypt and countries which have the same conditions as Egypt. People will not, when the interest rate is down, is decreased, will not take the risk and inject the money into the stocks in the stock markets. Or maybe the right thing is to create vehicles, investment vehicles and investment schemes, saving schemes to attract or encourage the depositors or the conventional depositors to contribute to these vehicles like the mutual funds, which are designed to be safe and offer reasonable yield on investment.
We're just going to take a short break and then we're going to get back to talking about the Egyptian economy. Let's take a break and come back again to Money Means Business. Welcome back. And can we talk a bit about how the government supports SMEs? I mean, this is something that's important for developing nations and developing small and medium enterprises. How does the government prop them up?
Let me put it this way. The SMEs are the driving force for the economy. If the economy if we need the economy to grow, we need to encourage and boost the efforts to support SMEs. In fact, most of the structure of the business community here in Egypt primarily rely on SMEs, which contribute to more than 70% of the business entities in Egypt. The Central Bank of Egypt has launched an initiative to finance small and medium enterprises and even the micro businesses. And this was not the first initiative that was adopted, was released by the Central Bank of Egypt. They offer loans and finance to SMEs at very preferential rates, starting from 5%, which is actually a reasonable interest rate for this sector. And the presidential, also the presidential initiative also recently mandated by President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi also indicates that the government is willing to support this sector and help the sector to take more positive role in the business community. The government also launched other initiatives to support SMEs from the technical side. Finance is not only the biggest hurdle for SMEs to grow, but again they need technical assistance assistance in marketing the services and products. That's what the government has focused to boost or to help this important sector.
Let's take it to another, like a full 360. We were earlier in the show talking about the new discovery in Egypt of a new archaeological city, and then a week ago we had the Mummy's Golden Parade. There's a lot of spending within the tourism sector with new museums and all of that. Is there an expectation for the next fiscal year for a return of tourism, and do we expect the numbers to increase dramatically, thereby, creating jobs and, increasing the revenue and all of that?
Well, there are expectations of that with the opening or abandoning the bans on travel and movement around the world. Egypt will witness an improvement in the tourism sector because what Egypt has shown the world in this parade, Golden Parade, a few days back, it was a very strong message to the entire world that Egypt is ready to have its treasures open for the world. And I've read many comments on BBC and on CNN, foreigners or potential visitors to Egypt are eager to come to Egypt and see these treasures because the way it was demonstrated to the entire world was so amazing. So I've read many positive comments, and this is encouraging, and the expectations actually center about receiving many tourists from different parts of the world.
Yeah, and the government has been working on creating new hotels and creating new museums and all of that. Do they have projections for possible tourists, the increase in tourists? Because I mean, previously during maybe 10 years ago, the numbers were quite dismal in comparison to other countries that don't have as much history as we do. Do we expect these numbers of tourists to increase? I know that at some point, maybe 10 years ago, there were like 6 or 7 million only coming into Egypt. Do we expect the numbers to be at least doubled?
Well, the least is to achieve the revenue from tourism the pre-pandemic.
Yes.
It reached about $13 billion, or maybe $12 billion, if my memory serves me right.
Yes.
So the investment in tourism sector, it is not just for building museums or it is more than that. It's about refurbishing the hotels, the facilities, paving the roads.
It's a long-term investment.
It's a long-term investment, and the government is keen to support the expenditure of the private sector in the tourism sector, in financing the projects for expansion and renovation.
Yes. And we're out of time right now, unfortunately, talking about the Egyptian economy, where there are lots of hopes, and hopefully that post-pandemic we're going to do very well. Thank you, Mr. Hany Abou-El-Fotouh, an economic expert. Thank you so much for joining us and enlightening us. Thank you so much. This brings us to the end of this episode of Money Means Business. Stay tuned for more on Now TV.